There are women who do not rush with the world's hurry. They move differently, not because they are weak, but because they carry centuries of wisdom within them. These are the women with old souls. They do not abandon, they do not discard, they do not conform. Instead, they leave things slowly, with the gravity of those who know that every ending reshapes the spirit. In their stillness lies their power, and in their patience lies their truth. The mask is the first thing a woman with an old soul begins to shed, though she does not do it in haste or rebellion. Jung called this mask the persona, the face one wears to meet the expectations of society, family, and culture. It is useful, sometimes even necessary, for without it, the individual risks exposure to judgments that can wound deeply. But for a woman who carries an old soul, the persona grows heavy over time. She feels the weight of roles that are not truly hers. She plays daughter, mother, wife, professional, or friend. Yet within each role, she senses a quiet fracture between what the world asks of her and what her inner life demands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she begins to step away from the theater of appearances. She does not rip off the mask violently, for that would only create another performance, a drama of defiance. Instead, she loosens it piece by piece. She learns to say less when expected to chatter. She declines invitations that drain her energy. She stops dressing to impress eyes that do not see her essence. What emerges is not rebellion but authenticity, the subtle movement of the psyche reclaiming its own ground. Jung observed that individuation, the path toward wholeness, is not a revolution, but an evolution. It unfolds quietly, often in solitude, and this woman knows that truth. Her old soul has lived many cycles of adaptation, compromise, and pleasing others, so she recognizes the futility of endlessly reshaping herself to fit collective molds. She no longer wishes to be only what society can recognize. The persona was once protection, a shield to survive in a world that rewards masks, but now it feels like a cage. By loosening its hold, she does not become less social, less kind, or less responsible. Rather, she becomes more real. She allows her tone of voice to reflect what she truly feels. She lets silence speak where false cheer once filled the air, and she stops rehearsing the lines that once earned approval. To the outer world, these changes may seem small. Friends may notice she withdraws from shallow conversations or declines to participate in rituals that no longer nourish her. But within, the shift is profound. Each time she lets go of the mask, she draws closer to the core of her being. She begins to notice her dreams more vividly, for they are no longer buried under the noise of pretended roles. Symbols emerge in her inner life that guide her further, pointing to who she has always been beneath the social face. This slow abandonment of the mask is not without struggle. The world resists authenticity because authenticity unsettles the patterns of conformity. Others may feel threatened by her quiet refusal to play along, as though her honesty exposes their disguises. She may face misunderstanding, criticism, or even isolation. Yet the old soul is patient. She does not expect the path of truth to be easy. She knows that in shedding the mask, she is also shedding illusions, and illusions are often beloved by those who fear reality. Her strength lies in her endurance, her willingness to bear the loneliness that sometimes comes with authenticity. The gradual departure from the mask also allows her to integrate parts of herself that were once hidden. In Jung's view, the persona can suffocate aspects of the psyche that do not fit cultural ideals. A woman expected to be endlessly nurturing may repress her anger. One expected to be endlessly strong may repress her vulnerability. As she steps away from the mask, these denied elements begin to return, at first awkwardly, then with greater harmony. She allows herself to feel anger without guilt, tenderness without shame, ambition without apology. The old soul knows that wholeness is not found in perfection but in integration. Each slow step away from the mask is a step toward freedom, but it is not freedom in the shallow sense of doing whatever one pleases. It is the deeper freedom of living in alignment with one's inner truth. She discovers that she can stand in a room without needing to be the most admired. She can love without pretending. She can work without enslaving herself to titles. She realizes that the greatest respect is not the admiration of others, but the recognition of her own self, the archetype at the center of the psyche that Jung described as the totality of being. To leave the mask behind is not to abandon society or reject all roles, but to wear them lightly, knowing they do not define her essence. She can still be a mother, a partner, a professional, but she is no longer consumed by the need to be only that. She knows her life is more than the sum of her functions. This knowledge grows slowly, like dawn breaking across a long horizon. With every mask that falls away, a truer face emerges, one that does not belong to appearances, but to the eternal soul that carries wisdom across lifetimes. The old soul understands that the shadow cannot be rushed, tamed, or conquered with force. It is the hidden double that walks beside her, carrying all the traits, desires, and fears that the world has taught her to reject. While many flee from their darkness, she pauses before it, sensing that in those neglected depths lives a part of her essence. Jung described the shadow as both frightening and necessary, a reservoir of energy that, if left unacknowledged, poisons the psyche, but if integrated, becomes a source of renewal. For the woman with an old soul, this is not a theory, but a lived reality. She feels the tug of the shadow in her dreams, in her moods, in the strange echoes that surface when she is alone. Rather than silencing them, she learns to listen. At first, this listening is unsettling. To admit that envy, anger, or desire lurks within contradicts the persona she once wore. Yet she knows that denying these aspects does not dissolve them. It only allows them to operate in secret, shaping her life from behind the curtain. Slowly, she turns her gaze toward the discomfort. She notices when her irritation hides beneath politeness, when jealousy disguises itself as indifference, when her longing for freedom clashes with her need for safety. Each recognition is small, but each one loosens the shadow's grip. For what is seen can no longer rule in the same way. The shadow does not release itself in a single revelation. It emerges in fragments, in symbols, in moments of emotional intensity that demand reflection. When she dreams of a figure chasing her, when she feels a surge of bitterness that surprises her, when she resists admitting a mistake, these are all invitations from the unconscious. She does not meet them with judgment, but with curiosity. She asks what part of her is speaking through these eruptions. This questioning is not easy, for the ego clings to its image of goodness and control. Yet the old soul recognizes that the path to wholeness is not paved with denial, but with integration. In facing her shadow, she begins to reclaim vitality that was once lost. A repressed anger becomes strength of will when acknowledged. A buried vulnerability becomes tenderness when accepted. Even her destructive impulses, when understood, can be transformed into creativity, for they hold energy that longs for expression. Jung wrote that the shadow is 90% pure gold, and she discovers the truth of this paradox. What once terrified her becomes a hidden treasury of life. But she arrives at this insight only slowly, because true integration requires patience. To force the shadow into the light is to risk distortion. She allows it to emerge in its own time, like a creature gaining trust after years of neglect. Others may find her unsettling, because she does not hide her complexity as the world expects. She may admit to feelings that most keep buried. She may speak truths that others avoid, and she may refuse the comfort of false positivity. Yet her honesty, though uncomfortable, carries a strange peace. It comes not from moral superiority, but from the humility of knowing herself more fully. The shadow still walks with her, still whispers and tempts, but it no longer dictates her path. She acknowledges it as part of her, and in that acknowledgement she becomes more whole. This gradual embrace also deepens her compassion for others. When she recognizes her own flaws, she sees the struggles of those around her with softer eyes. She no longer demands perfection, for she knows how much effort it takes to reconcile with one's darkness. She understands that cruelty often hides pain, that arrogance often masks fear, that apathy often conceals exhaustion. In seeing her own shadow clearly, she becomes less quick to judge the shadows of others. Her wisdom grows not from escaping darkness, but from befriending it. The old soul does not emerge from this process unscarred, but she does emerge more authentic. She carries the marks of her battles with the unconscious, yet she does not wear them with shame. Each scar is a reminder that she has looked inward without turning away. She has learned to stand at the threshold where light and dark meet, refusing to live in denial of either. This balance does not make her invincible, but it makes her real. And in being real, she touches a depth of life that eludes those who cling to masks of purity. The woman with an old soul knows the sound of the collective's noise. It is the endless chatter of opinions, the pressure to conform, the flood of voices telling her who she should be and what she should want. From childhood, this noise surrounds her like a constant hum, shaping her choices before she has even recognized them as her own. To be accepted, she has learned to repeat what others believe, to seek approval from authorities, peers, and traditions. Yet deep within there has always been another voice, quieter but more enduring, whispering of a truth that does not depend on the crowd. Slowly, she learns to turn away from the collective's demands and listen to the call of the inner world. This departure is not dramatic, for she does not despise the collective. She understands that society is necessary, that humans must live in shared structures to survive. But survival is not the same as fulfillment, and conformity is not the same as meaning. When the collective insists on speed, she feels called to move slowly. When it demands certainty, she accepts mystery. When it shouts of ambition and competition, she feels drawn to depth and reflection. These contrasts set her apart, not because she rebels for the sake of rebellion, but because her old soul is tuned to a different rhythm. The process of detaching begins quietly. She may notice that the endless scroll of opinions on her devices leaves her empty rather than enriched. She may realize that conversations full of gossip and triviality drain her energy. She may feel restless in groups that require her to suppress her own thoughts for the sake of fitting in. Little by little, she steps back, not in anger but in discernment. Each withdrawal opens more space for her inner voice to emerge, and that voice is never as loud as the crowd. Yet it resonates with an authority she cannot ignore. Dreams, symbols, and intuitions begin to rise in the silence she creates. Jung described the unconscious as a wellspring of wisdom that communicates not in rational argument but in images and feelings. The old-souled woman becomes sensitive to these subtle messages. A recurring dream might suggest a neglected path. A sudden image in meditation might reveal what her ego has overlooked. A feeling of resistance when pressured into conformity might signal that her deeper self is speaking. By attending to these signs, she begins to trust the guidance that arises from within, even when it contradicts the world around her. Others may misunderstand her retreat from the collective. They may call her distant, strange, or aloof. They may assume she thinks herself superior or detached from reality. Yet her withdrawal is not an act of superiority but of necessity. She cannot hear her own soul in the clamor of mass opinions. She cannot live authentically if she constantly shapes herself to fit the shifting moods of the collective. What she seeks is not isolation, but authenticity, a life aligned with her own depths rather than the surface expectations of others. This slow detachment does not mean she cuts herself off from humanity. On the contrary, it allows her to meet others more genuinely. When she is no longer driven by the need to please, she can listen without defensiveness. When she no longer clings to popular ideals, she can accept people as they are, rather than as roles within a system. Her solitude deepens her capacity for connection, for she relates not through masks and conformity, but through authenticity and presence. The collective thrives on speed, on distraction, on the constant demand for attention. She thrives on silence, on reflection, on the sacred space where the psyche can breathe. In choosing to step away, she does not reject the world, but reorders her relationship to it. She can engage when she chooses, but she is no longer enslaved by it. The noise loses its power because she has found her own inner ground. The voice within becomes her compass, guiding her through the chaos of the external world with a sense of quiet certainty. Her journey away from the collective is slow because it is not an act of external rebellion, but an internal realignment. To detach too quickly would risk replacing one set of voices with another, one form of conformity with a new dogma. Instead, she proceeds with patience, allowing her inner authority to grow strong enough to withstand the pull of external pressures. Each time she chooses silence over noise, reflection over distraction, truth over approval, she strengthens her bond with the self, the center of the psyche that Jung described as the totality of the individual. Through this gradual process, she discovers that true freedom is not found in rejecting society entirely, nor in losing herself to its demands, but in walking the middle path. She learns to live within the collective without being consumed by it, to engage with the world while listening first to the voice within. In doing so, she embodies the timeless wisdom of her old soul, carrying a depth that cannot be shaken by the shifting tides of public opinion. The woman with an old soul comes to know that not everything she holds is meant to be carried forever. Her life, like a river, gathers many attachments along the way. Relationships that once felt vital, beliefs that once offered certainty, possessions that once promised security, dreams that once lit her path. Yet she discovers, often with quiet sorrow, that some of these no longer serve her growth. They become stagnant, heavy, or lifeless, clinging more out of habit than out of truth. She does not cast them aside in haste, for her old soul respects the role they once played, but she learns to release them slowly, carefully, as one would untie a knot that has been woven for years. This letting go is not an act of rejection, but an act of recognition. She sees clearly when a friendship has lost its depth, when a belief has turned into dogma, when a desire no longer arises from her heart, but from imitation of others. The recognition does not come easily, for attachments are bound with emotion, memory, and identity. She may hold on to them long after they have lost their meaning, not because she is blind, but because her soul is reverent. She honors the seasons of her life and does not discard what once was sacred without acknowledging its value. But as she listens inward, she begins to sense when it is time to loosen her grip. The slow pace of her detachment reflects her wisdom. To let go too quickly risks severing before understanding. She wishes to know why she clung, what she learned, what hidden need was met by what she now releases. In examining these ties, she uncovers her own patterns of dependence and projection. Perhaps the relationship she lingers on mirrored a part of herself she had not yet owned. Perhaps the belief she held gave structure to a time when she feared chaos. Perhaps the possession she treasured represented a promise of stability she longed for. In each case, the act of loosening is also the act of learning. There is pain in this process. Attachments, even when outgrown, hold echoes of love, comfort, and familiarity. Letting them go can feel like stepping into emptiness, and the emptiness can be frightening. Yet she learns to trust that space is not loss but possibility. Where an old bond dissolves, room is created for new growth, for deeper authenticity, for alignment with the self. She does not rush to fill the void, for her soul knows that the void itself is fertile. In the silence after release, her inner life breathes more freely. The outer world may not understand this slow detachment. Others may urge her to hold on, to conform, to stay within what is comfortable and familiar. They may accuse her of ingratitude, of coldness, of being unwilling to fight for what once mattered. But she knows that to cling to what no longer nourishes her spirit is to betray herself. She does not leave in anger nor with harsh judgment, but with the quiet dignity of someone who has recognized that growth sometimes requires departure. In letting go of beliefs, she allows herself to live in mystery. In letting go of relationships that no longer resonate, she frees both herself and the other to walk truer paths. In letting go of material attachments, she finds she is not diminished, but lightened, less encumbered by the weight of things. In each act of release, she aligns more closely with her essence. The self that Jung saw as the center of the psyche, the point of wholeness that transcends temporary roles and possessions. What she discovers is that attachment, when unexamined, becomes a prison, but when released, becomes a lesson. Each slow loosening is a dialogue with the unconscious, a recognition that the soul grows not by accumulation but by transformation. She sees that clinging to what is already dead keeps her from embracing what is alive. She realizes that love too is not possession but flow, that true faith is not in rigid belief, but in the openness of spirit. That identity is not in roles or objects, but in the unfolding journey toward wholeness. Thus, her old soul lets go not out of bitterness but out of trust. Trust that what is real will remain in its own way, and what departs was never hers to hold forever. Trust that the self draws her forward, calling her to shed what no longer serves in order to reveal what is eternal. The slowness of her leaving is the mark of reverence, the deep respect for the threads of her life even as she unties them. She knows that every ending carries within it a seed of beginning, and in loosening her attachments, she makes space for the soul to breathe more freely, to love more purely, and to live more authentically. The woman with an old soul does not measure her strength only by reason or external achievement. Her life is guided by a quieter current, a wisdom that rises from within and takes the form of intuition, images and feelings that cannot always be explained. Jung spoke of the anima as the inner feminine, the archetypal source of imagination, tenderness, and connection to the unconscious. For the old-souled woman, this inner anima is not something to be discovered in others, but something she carries in her own depth. It is both her companion and her compass, leading her away from haste and into the rhythm of a more enduring truth. She does not rush decisions, for she knows that haste often silences intuition. She allows space for dreams to speak, for subtle impressions to reveal themselves. Where others demand instant answers, she permits herself to wait, to feel, to listen beneath the surface. This patience is not indecision, but a trust in the inner wisdom that takes time to unfold. Her choices may appear slow to those who live in constant urgency, but they are deliberate, infused with a sense of alignment that comes from listening to the anima's voice. Her intuition often arrives as images rather than arguments, as moods rather than logic. A sudden sense of unease may tell her that a path is false, even when it looks promising. A feeling of peace may draw her toward something modest and unnoticed, yet deeply right for her spirit. She does not ignore these signals, for she has learned through experience that they are not random. They are communications from the deeper layers of the psyche, the parts of herself that hold knowledge beyond the reach of reason. In honoring the anima within, she also nurtures qualities that society often undervalues. The collective may prize speed, efficiency, and control, but she understands the necessity of reflection, receptivity, and imagination. These are not weaknesses but gateways into the unconscious, and the unconscious is where the soul renews itself. She allows herself to dream not as escape but as dialogue with her depths. She values solitude not as withdrawal but as communion with the inner life. She accepts emotions not as obstacles but as messengers. In living this way, she embodies a wisdom that feels ancient, for it does not bow to the demands of external success, but to the truth of inner growth. Her respect for the anima also shapes her relationships. She does not seek connection through pretense or superficial roles, but through authenticity. She listens deeply not only to words but to silences, gestures, and hidden meanings. She senses what is unspoken in others, not as a trick of perception, but as an attunement of her own inner life to theirs. This depth of presence can be unsettling for some, for it bypasses masks and touches what is vulnerable. Yet it is also healing, for it allows those around her to feel seen in ways they rarely experience. The anima within her also fosters creativity. She may write, paint, or simply imagine in ways that weave together fragments of the unconscious into expressions of meaning. These acts are not always meant for public recognition. Often they are rituals of self-integration, ways of giving form to what stirs inside her. Jung taught that the soul speaks through symbols, and her creative impulses are the language of those symbols taking shape in the world. Each poem, drawing, or vision becomes an act of dialogue with the self, a step further on the path of individuation. Living in this way is not always easy. The world may misinterpret her patience as passivity, her intuition as irrationality, her depth as strangeness. She may feel pressure to silence her inner voice and conform to the logic of the crowd. Yet her old soul knows that abandoning the anima would mean severing herself from her source of wisdom. She carries the feminine principle within not as weakness, but as strength, not as fragility, but as a deeper grounding in life's mysteries. Even when misunderstood, she remains loyal to this truth, for it is what keeps her aligned with the self. Her movement through life is deliberate and graceful, as though each step carries the weight of unseen counsel. She may stumble, but she does not collapse into despair, for she trusts the rhythm that guides her. She does not need to know all at once. She allows herself to know gradually, as the unconscious reveals what she is ready to bear. This trust in inner timing is the mark of her old soul, the sign that she has woven patience into wisdom, intuition into guidance, and imagination into reality. Through the anima, she learns that life is not only about outward conquest, but about inward harmony. She understands that her deepest power lies not in control, but in alignment, not in force, but in flow. By honoring this inner feminine, she honors the soul itself, allowing it to guide her through uncertainty with quiet strength. And in doing so, she becomes more whole, more true, more attuned to the eternal depth from which all wisdom arises. Every slow departure a woman with an old soul makes is not simply a loss, but a step toward the greater journey of individuation. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, of uniting the conscious and the unconscious, of reconciling the fragments of the psyche into a living harmony. For such a woman, leaving behind masks, illusions, and attachments is not about rejection of life, but about movement toward her truest center. Each ending carries with it an unseen beginning, and each act of release draws her closer to the self. That inner totality that stands beyond ego, beyond roles, beyond the shifting circumstances of time. She understands that life cannot be lived authentically without change, and change often arrives as departure. To let go of what no longer serves her is to free herself from stagnation. Yet she does not walk away carelessly. Her old soul respects the bonds she has formed, the beliefs she has held, the identities she has worn. That respect is why her leaving is slow. She lingers long enough to understand, to learn, to integrate the meaning of what she has experienced. Only then does she step forward, carrying not bitterness, but wisdom. For her, individuation is not a violent tearing away, but a gradual unfolding, a ripening of the soul through cycles of gain and release. Each slow departure asks her to face herself more honestly. When she loosens her grip on the persona, she must confront who she is without the mask. When she embraces her shadow, she must accept the flaws and contradictions she once denied. When she detaches from the noise of the collective, she must listen for the quieter voice within. When she lets go of old attachments, she must walk into the emptiness they leave behind. When she honors the anima, she must trust feelings and intuitions that others may dismiss. These steps are not easy, but they are necessary. They strip away what is false and reveal what is essential. The old soul does not rush this process because individuation cannot be forced. The unconscious reveals itself in its own time, often through dreams, symbols, and synchronicities that arise unexpectedly. She has learned that to push too hard is to distort the process, to mistake ego's impatience for the self's calling. So she moves with patience, accepting that growth is measured not in quick victories, but in the subtle shifts of awareness. Her life becomes a dialogue between inner and outer, between conscious choice and unconscious guidance, between the temporal and the eternal. The world around her may view her departures as weakness, indecision, or even loss, but she knows otherwise. She recognizes that what she leaves behind creates the very path she must walk. In shedding illusions, she does not become empty but free. In relinquishing roles, she does not become less but more whole. In turning from conformity, she does not become alien but authentic. Each step of individuation deepens her connection to the self, and in that connection, she discovers a strength that no external approval can give. Her journey is not without pain. There are moments of grief, of loneliness, of uncertainty, but these are not failures. They are part of the transformation. Jung taught that individuation requires confronting the opposites within the psyche, holding tension until a new synthesis emerges. She experiences this tension in her struggles, yet she does not flee from it. She allows the opposites to coexist, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, individuality and belonging. From this tension arises a deeper harmony, one not imposed from outside, but born within. What she ultimately discovers is that individuation is not about becoming someone new, but about becoming who she has always been. Beneath the layers of persona, beyond the projections of the shadow, outside the clamor of the collective, and apart from attachments, there is a self that is whole, timeless, and true. Every slow departure is a peeling back of what obscures this essence. Every release brings her closer to her center. Her life is not a path of accumulation, but of unveiling. Not a climb toward power, but a descent into truth. The woman with an old soul does not reach individuation in a final moment of triumph, for it is not a destination, but a lifelong unfolding. She continues to walk, to release, to integrate, to grow. Each slow departure is a step further into the mystery of her own wholeness. She carries within her the wisdom that to leave is not to lose, but to enter more fully into the life that was always waiting within. The journey of women with old souls is not a race against time, nor a struggle for perfection. It is a slow, deliberate unfolding, a leaving behind of masks, illusions, noise, and attachments that once seemed necessary but now obscure the self. Each step, though quiet, carries the power of transformation. To shed the false is to awaken the true. To embrace the shadow is to walk toward wholeness. To listen inward is to find the voice that no crowd can silence. And so, their slowness is not weakness but wisdom, the wisdom of souls who have lived enough to know that becoming whole cannot be hurried. Every departure is an arrival. Every ending is a birth. And in their still, patient walk toward individuation, they do not merely live. They embody the eternal depth of the human spirit.